Yeah, at the left it's Redmi K30 Ultra and at the right it's Redmi K30 Pro. Before we start, let me show you something. Redmi K30 Ultra received an update and there is a huge difference in camera performance, especially with AI enabled. Look at this. When I take pictures with AI, it's a little brighter and there are some artificial color grading, additional color tint and white balance changes based on ambient colors. Now this is taken with AI disabled and things are totally different, more natural and performance wise very close to Redmi K30 Pro. Redmi K30 Pro doesn't have any big difference between with or without AI. Now you understand the trend. And I thought as they have added this with an update, I should go with AI enabled along with Auto HDR. Yeah, let's start with ultra wide lens, and now you know that the sky color on the left was artificially changed by Redmi K30 Ultra AI. I would say it's amazing if it could do selective rendering and white balance, but it applied the change through the images, resulting change in color tone, skin tone and white balance. Yes, I have mentioned many times that this depends on personal preference and the images on the left are really lucrative. However, as I prefer true tone with correct white balance, I would go with Redmi K30 Pro. Moving on to the main sensor, and this time without any hesitation, Redmi K30 Ultra beaten Redmi K30 Pro. Details, sharpness, exposure, white balance. A lot of things are better on Redmi K30 Ultra. Yes, some may argue that there is a slight saturation on Redmi K30 Ultra. However, if you watch through this video, then you will notice that saturation and white balance, these jumps back and forth between Redmi K30 Pro and K30 Ultra. Both K30 Pro and K30 Ultra failed to produce images with good dynamic range. Selective exposure between subject and background is missing. However, it seems Redmi K30 Pro color rendering and skin tone is more close to reality in most of the occasions. Texture processing is also a bit better on Redmi K30 Pro. None of these smartphones got a telephoto lens. These 2x zoom images are actually digital zoom and it grabs pictures with the main sensor and crops it in the center to create these 2x images. I think Redmi K30 Pro did better cause I can see more details, well processed textures. It also processed the images with sharpness. Redmi K30 Ultra and K30 Pro color rendering and saturation is almost the same. But I guess due to that AI effect and a bit better shadows, most of the people would go with Redmi K30 Ultra. No telephoto lens means no genuine portrait, no 50mm portrait photos. Both of these did perform almost exactly the same other than two things. The differences are actually is in white balance and in contrast ratio. Edge detection and bokeh effect is pretty identical. I have tried to walk closer toward the model Karina to create a 50mm portrait effect, but it is really difficult to do. However, moving closer, the portraits looks better, and with the help of its new AI, Redmi K30 Ultra generated better looking pictures with bokeh effect. It was a sunny morning, but the weather started to behave strangely and started to drizzle. We have changed our place and tried to take as many photos as quickly. The main differences in ultra-wide mode is exposure and textures. Redmi K30 Ultra managed to increase brightness without blowing the background, which it did 2 days ago because then it didn't have this update. Yeah, when I have compared K30 Ultra with Mi 10 Ultra, K30 Ultra performance was pretty poor. But after this update, that has changed a bit. Another thing is, if this is the positive point, there comes a negative point. It loses a lot more textures in the processing and some parts of the pictures get softer than before. Who'd care that? Cause Redmi K30 Ultra now got better dynamic range and the images looks way better than Redmi K30 Pro. Similar trend continued. Yeah, these photos are taken with the main sensor. I'm really feeling like I should take this K30 Ultra and compare with OnePlus 8 Pro. Look at this picture. Other than that slight white balance issue, this is a great photo. Enough details, sharpness, selective exposure, top class color rendering, almost perfect contrast ratio, and of course dynamic range is better on Redmi K30 Ultra. Wait, but the truth is, I took this photo in Pro mode. Yeah, I was a bit tired of that funny AI and it took me about a few minutes to grab these. I had to change a few settings. Now let us continue with the stock camera auto mode. I'm really very disappointed with one thing. Why Xiaomi cannot spend a little more time and money to tune their stock camera application? What is so difficult about it? Redmi K30 Pro continued to generate darker images with more details, but what would I do with those details when shadows are pretty low? I have made these images available for download. Please download and check by yourself. Link is in the description box below. Yes, I have taken a lot of 2x zoom images and the differences are the same as the main sensor photos. However, if you spend a little more time, then you will find that Redmi K30 Pro actually generates more details and sharpness in digital zoom images. Color rendition and tone is also a bit better. Sometimes it goes a little saturated, but overall I think Redmi K30 Pro did better. Oh, suddenly it started to downpour. I mean, we could accept that drizzle, but downpour? No. Karina left for home and I continued to take indoor photos inside a shopping mall. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Yeah, Redmi K30 Pro started to produce brighter indoor images and Redmi K30 Ultra suddenly went a little dark, a little saturated. White balance also got worse. Ultra wide photos of Redmi K30 Pro has true to life color grading and less noise. White balance issue got worse on Redmi K30 Ultra in indoor low light environment. Saturation started to play hide and seek with these two smartphones. Yeah, it's like if Redmi K30 produces a saturated image, then the next one would get saturated on Redmi K30 Ultra. Based on amount of details and processed textures, I would stick to K30 Pro rather than K30 Ultra. I have found that most of the time viewers say it's an issue with the sensor, but that's not always true. You have to understand that Redmi K30 Ultra comes with a weaker DSP, along with different level of processing and algorithm. We cannot just blame one factor when there are many. If anyone asks an easy question, which one of these two smartphones are better for camera purpose? I would say both are equally good with their own positives and negatives. A lot depends on personal preferences. However, I would continue to use Redmi K30 Pro cause I know I can edit a picture with more details and less exposure. But with less details and shadows, you cannot really do something drastic on editing table. Yeah, Redmi K30 Ultra increases contrast ratio at a point where color get a little pale and you will get confirmation in selfie camera video. Bokeh effect and edge detection again very much identical to each other, fail to detect hard and harsh edges. Bokeh effect is more like heavy blur and I think skin tone is better on Redmi K30 Ultra. Okay, here is our selfie video and on the left it's a Redmi K30 Ultra and on the right it's Redmi K30 Pro. None got any type of stabilization on its front camera. Due to its high brightness and contrast, colors are really very pale and different than reality on Redmi K30 Ultra. Color rendition and white balance is much better on Redmi K30 Pro. Redmi K30 Pro blown the background and Redmi K30 Ultra with its new update did way better to keep more details in the background. Again, Redmi K30 Ultra did better and this time I'm talking about low noise, high details. I want you to watch these clips carefully. Yeah, these are recorded at 1080p 30 frames per second and I walked carelessly. Check the jelly effect on the left and then amount of details. Dynamic range and change in exposure. Have you found the differences? Take your time and you will find that even if Redmi K30 Ultra have white balance issue, actually Redmi K30 Ultra produced more textures and sharpness.
Stay, make a new life with you. Must be fate, must be a sign.
These are recorded at 4K 30 frames per second and Redmi K30 Pro stabilization is way better for sure. Both saturated the clips with heavy midtones and shadows. Now it seems like Redmi K30 Pro did better in post-processing. I see sharpness and more details in the shadows on the right. The video on the left is actually pretty average quality, but I cannot disagree that Redmi K30 Ultra still managed to have a bit wider dynamic range. Oh, one thing, Redmi K30 Ultra cannot record videos at 4K 60 frames per second, so forget about 8K. Yeah, if you don't know yet, then Redmi K30 Pro can record videos at 8K. Even if there is no stabilization, there is an option for 8K.
To be a perfect day.
Yeah, as per request of the subscribers, I have added these slow motion clips. Both supports 120, 240 and 960 frames per second at 1080p and 720p. And you can see the differences straight away. Anyway, it's time to wrap up. As usual, I'm not going to give any verdict. I'm waiting for your verdict because I have already mentioned what I wanted to say, what I wanted you to know. So I will wait for your comments, and if you have liked this video, then please don't forget to click on the like button and subscribe to this channel.